I don't really talk about this a lot, not because I don't want to, but because every time I do, I end up going down a rabbit hole that keeps me up for like 3 or 4 nights after. But I've been sitting on this for a while now, and I think I just need to get it out. So here goes. Back in 2019, I was working a night shift security gig at a cold storage facility outside of Bakersfield. And when I say outside, I mean like genuinely in the middle of nowhere. You'd take the highway for about 20 minutes, and then turn off onto this long, flat access road, and there was nothing out there but oil fields and dry grass and the facility itself. No houses nearby, no other buildings, just this big refrigerated warehouse complex fenced in with chain link and barbed wire and 2 guard booths, one at the front, which was mine, and one at the back. The guy on the back gate was named Felix. I'd known him maybe 4 months at that point. We weren't close friends, but we got along fine. He was a quiet dude, pretty calm. Older than me by maybe 10 years, ex-military. The kind of guy who didn't freak out easily and didn't really joke around either, which is why I always trusted what he said. Okay, so the shift usually started at 10 and went until 6 in the morning, and for the first few hours it was always busy enough. Trucks coming in late, workers leaving, occasional paperwork. But after midnight, it went dead quiet basically every single night, and the rest of the shift was just me and Felix radioing back and forth to kill time. Talking about sports or whatever was on TV, or just complaining about the job. Normal stuff. It made the time go faster. Now the facility had security cameras all the way around the perimeter. I had a monitor in my booth with a split screen showing 6 different angles. So did Felix at the back. And I want you to understand, the surrounding area was completely flat. There were no trees, no structures nearby. Just open ground for as far as you could see in any direction before it got too dark for the cameras to pick up. So if something was out there, you'd see it. On the night I'm talking about, it had been a quiet shift. I'd let in 1 truck around 11, and that was it. By 1 in the morning, Felix and I had been chatting on the radio about basically nothing for a couple hours. And then around 1:30, he went quiet for a bit, which wasn't unusual. Sometimes he'd just put down the radio and watch something on his phone. I was going through the camera feeds like I always did, just sweeping through them every few minutes, when I caught something on the east side monitor. There was a shape, just standing there at the edge of the camera's range. It was far enough out that I genuinely couldn't tell what it was. Could have been a person. Could have been a fence post I just hadn't noticed before. I actually sat there for a second trying to remember if there was anything out there, and I couldn't come up with an answer. I radioed Felix and told him to check his east side camera. He came back pretty quick and said, yeah, he saw it too, and he thought it looked like someone standing there. We watched it for maybe 5 or 6 minutes, and it didn't move at all, which actually made it more unsettling to me because a person standing perfectly still in the dark a quarter mile from a warehouse at 1:30 in the morning is not a normal thing. Eventually, Felix said probably just a surveying post or something, and I told him, yeah, probably. We dropped it. But I kept checking that camera, and about 20 minutes later the shape was gone. I told Felix, and he just said, huh, and that was it. We went back to talking. Another hour went by and nothing happened, and I genuinely started to forget about it. And then around 3 in the morning, Felix said something over the radio that I still think about a lot. He said, hey, do you ever feel like you're being watched out there? And I kind of laughed and said, sometimes, yeah. Why? And he said, no reason, just curious. And I said, Felix, what are you seeing? And he said, nothing. Never mind, forget I said anything. I asked him 2 more times, and he wouldn't answer either of them, which was weird for him because he wasn't evasive. So I pulled up the camera on his side and looked at his booth. He was sitting in his chair. Looked fine, but he was staring at something off to the side of his monitor, not looking at the camera feed, just staring at the wall of his booth. I didn't push it. I figured he was just tired. About 40 minutes later, I heard his radio click on, and then nothing. No voice. Just the click, and then silence. I said, Felix, you there? Nothing. I said his name 2 more times and then waited, and then tried again, and still nothing. And the thing is, when your radio partner goes quiet like that, there's a part of your brain that immediately starts making excuses for it. Phone died, fell asleep, stepped out to use the bathroom. Normal stuff, and I tried to hold on to that. But then I pulled up his camera feed. His booth was empty, not like he stepped just outside the door kind of empty. Like his chair was pushed back and his coffee was still there and the monitor was still on and there was just no Felix. I switched through every angle on his side of the facility looking for him, and I didn't see him anywhere. and I want you to understand this is a fenced compound. There was nowhere for him to be on the cameras where I wouldn't be able to see at least some part of him. I scrubbed back the footage maybe 15 minutes. I watched him sitting in his booth. Then, I watched him stand up and look at something I couldn't see off to the right of his camera angle. He stood there for about 40 seconds. Then he walked to the door of his booth and opened it and stepped outside. And then he walked right up to the perimeter gate on his side, and he punched in the code, and the gate rolled open, and he walked out into the dark. He wasn't running. He wasn't looking behind him. He just walked out like he had somewhere to be. I sat there for probably 30 seconds just staring at the screen before I grabbed my radio and started trying to reach him again. Nothing. I tried calling his cell and it rang out. I genuinely didn't know what to do. I wasn't supposed to leave my station, but I also had this horrible feeling in my stomach that something was really wrong. And I know what you're thinking. Just call the police immediately. But I want to explain something about this job. Any incident involving emergency services meant a full report, a company review, possible station audit. We'd had a false alarm a few months earlier over a trespasser that turned out to be a coyote, and the paperwork alone took 2 weeks. So there was always this pressure to be sure before you made that call. Which is stupid in hindsight, I know that. I tried Felix one more time, nothing. And then I did something I still don't totally understand. I left my booth and walked toward the back gate. I was telling myself I'd just check if he was nearby, like maybe he'd just stepped out for a second and his radio had died. I don't know. I wasn't thinking straight. When I got to the back gate, I could see his booth from the outside, and the lights were still on and it still looked empty. I punched in the gate code and stepped outside, and immediately just called his name out loud into the dark. And it was so quiet out there, like genuinely no wind, no traffic noise from the highway, nothing. My voice just disappeared into the air. And then about 200 yards out in the field, I saw a light, just a small white light moving slowly. And for a second, I thought Felix had a flashlight. I almost called his name toward it. But something stopped me. I don't know what it was, just this heavy feeling that said, do not do that. Do not make a sound. I backed up slowly and got inside the gate and latched it and walked back to my station and called the police. Felix never came back. The investigation went on for about 6 weeks. They searched the surrounding area. They interviewed everyone on shift that night. They reviewed every second of footage, and the thing that apparently bothered the detectives most, the thing that one of them actually said to me directly, was that on the footage from 30 seconds before Felix stood up in his booth, one of the exterior cameras on his side caught something at the very edge of its range, just barely visible. A shape standing still at the fence line, watching. And the timestamp on that exterior camera was 3 minutes before Felix's radio clicked on, with nothing on the other end. They never found him. The case went cold about 8 months later. I quit the job, obviously. But here's the thing I can't shake. When I left my station that night and walked to the back gate, I was outside that fence for maybe 5 or 6 minutes, standing in the same dark field, and whatever was out there could see me the whole time. I think about that a lot. About 6 years ago, I took a security posting at a decommissioned textile mill on the east side of a pretty small city in North Carolina. The building had been vacant for close to 15 years at that point. It was enormous. 3 floors, long corridors, old machinery still sitting in some of the rooms because it was too expensive to haul out. The city had bought it with some plan to redevelop it, and in the meantime, they'd hired a security company to keep it from getting completely trashed by whoever decided to break in on a given week. My partner on most shifts was a woman named Gina. She'd been with the company longer than me, and she knew the building better than anyone. She was direct, no nonsense, and she had this energy where you just trusted her instincts automatically. If Gina said it was fine, it was fine. If Gina said something was off, you listened. For the first 3 weeks, nothing happened. We had the occasional teenager who'd wander up to the fence and then think better of it. One night we found a tent set up near the east loading dock by someone who'd been sleeping rough, and we just called it in and waited for services to come, and that was that. Normal stuff. The building itself was creepy just by virtue of being a huge empty mill at 3 in the morning, but nothing actually happened. Then one night, Gina went to check the second floor during one of our walkthroughs, and I stayed on monitors. And when she came back down, she looked different. Not scared exactly, but quiet in a way. She wasn't normally quiet. I asked her if everything was fine up there, and she said, yeah, just some debris shifted around. probably from the wind coming through the broken windows on the far end. And I said okay, and she said okay, and we moved on. But the next day she called in sick, and the day after. And then on the third day I got a call from our coordinator saying Gina had put in her notice, just like that. I texted her directly because I was genuinely worried, and she took about 2 days to respond, and when she did, all she said was sorry. I just couldn't do it anymore, and that was it. I tried following up once more, and she left me on red. You have to understand, this is Gina we're talking about. Woman, who once talked down a guy who was trying to break into the hospital I mentioned earlier. Just calm and steady and unflappable, and she quit a security job at an abandoned mill without even giving a reason. I thought about it a lot, but I also told myself that I didn't know everything going on in her life, and maybe it had nothing to do with the building. Maybe it was personal stuff. I genuinely tried to believe that. I was alone on my shifts now, and our company was slow to replace Gina, so for about 2 weeks it was just me, and for the first week, nothing happened. But then, on a Thursday night around 2 in the morning, I was doing a solo walkthrough of the second floor. And in one of the old weaving rooms toward the back, I found a mattress. Just an old beat-up mattress pushed against the wall with a blanket on it and a plastic bag nearby with what looked like some food wrappers and a water bottle. Someone had been sleeping in there, regularly, from the look of it. I backed out of the room and got back to the monitoring office and pulled up the exterior camera logs from the past week, and I found it on the third night back. There was a gap in the fence on the north side that we hadn't noticed, and just after midnight a person had slipped through, dressed dark, carrying what looked like a bag. They came in, didn't trigger any of the interior cameras, obviously because we didn't have any, and left before my shift ended. They'd done it at least 4 times in the past 2 weeks. Okay, so I reported it, wrote it all up, and here's where it gets weird. My coordinator told me to note it in the logs, and they'd have someone come patch the fence, but in the meantime to just keep an eye on it, which I thought was an insane response, but I also didn't have a lot of options. So I started paying more attention to that north side camera. 2 nights later, just after 1 in the morning, I saw someone come through the gap. Same dark clothing, same bag. But this time I was ready, and I left the monitoring office and positioned myself on the first floor in a spot where I could see the stairwell. I wanted to at least get a look at who this was. I waited maybe 15 minutes, and I heard footsteps on the stairs, slow and careful. Whoever it was, they knew the building well enough to navigate it in the dark. They came down to the first floor, and I watched from around the corner as a man walked past. He was older, maybe 50s, wearing a heavy jacket. He wasn't acting threatening. He just looked like someone who was tired and trying not to be seen. He walked to a side room near the loading dock and went in, and I heard him sit down. And here's the part that messes with me. My first instinct was not to call the police. I just stood there in the hallway for a few minutes, thinking about what this actually was. This wasn't the dangerous intruder I'd been imagining. This was someone who had nowhere to go. I didn't know what to do. So I just quietly went back to the monitoring office and sat there and tried to think. I knew technically I was supposed to report it, but I also just... Okay, I called it in. I want to be clear that I did. But while I was waiting for the officers to arrive, I went back to that side room and stood outside the door and said, "Hey, there are police coming." And I heard movement inside and then nothing. By the time officers got there, he was gone, back through the north fence probably. But here's where it stops being a sad story and turns into something else. Because about a week later on another solo shift, I was in the monitoring office and I heard something on the second floor. And I pulled up the camera log and I went back through it and I saw someone come through that fence again. Same time, same way. But this time, when I got the angle on the second floor landing camera, there were 2 people, not 1. And the second one I didn't recognize. Different build, different way of moving, more deliberate. I stayed in the monitoring office that night. I didn't do a walkthrough. I told myself the fence was getting patched in 2 days, and I just had to get through until then. But the thing that I think about, the thing that got to me the way Gina got to me before she left, is what happened when I scrubbed back through the second floor landing camera from Gina's last night. The night she came back from the walkthrough and looked different. I hadn't thought to check it before because at the time I had no reason to. But there she was on the footage, coming down the back stairwell. And just before she reaches the bottom, there's someone visible at the top of the stairs behind her. Just standing there in the dark, at the edge of the camera frame, watching her go. She never looked back. She didn't know they were there. I quit the next morning, and I've thought about that image basically every week since, because I did those walkthroughs solo for 2 weeks after Gina left. And whoever was up on that landing watching her was also up there on nights I was alone, and I never once looked behind me on those stairs. I try not to think about what they saw. Okay, so this one is hard for me to write out because there's parts of it I still don't fully understand, and I'm not sure I ever will. But I think about it enough that I feel like I need to just get it down somewhere. Bear with me, because there's a bit of background that you need to know first. About 4 years ago, I took what seemed like the most straightforward security job I'd ever had, private residential. A family out in a rural part of Washington state, maybe 40 minutes outside of Spokane, had this property, big place. Old farmhouse that had been renovated multiple times over the years, so it was kind of this mix of original structure and newer additions all connected together. The family, I'll just call them the Aldersons because I don't want to use real names, they had 3 kids and they were basically never there, traveled constantly. So most of my shifts, I had the whole property to myself. I was the second guard they'd hired. The one before me had apparently left pretty abruptly, and they didn't really go into why, which should have registered more with me than it did. Instead, I just assumed the guy found a better gig or didn't like the isolation out there, because I want to tell you it was genuinely isolated. The nearest house was almost 2 miles down the road. No streetlights. On a cloudy night, you couldn't see basically anything past the tree line. For the first 2 months, everything was fine. I'd get there at 9, do a walk of the exterior, check all the ground floor entry points, then post up in the kitchen area, where they'd set up a small desk for me with a monitor showing the 3 exterior cameras they had, one on the front, one on the back, and one covering the long driveway. And that was it. 3 cameras for a property that size, which even at the time I thought was a little light, but it wasn't my call. The family came and went a few times during those 2 months. Seemed normal. The dad was friendly enough, the mom was polite but distracted. The kids were just kids. Nothing felt off about any of it. Then they left for what they said would be about 3 weeks, and I had the place to myself again. And the first few nights were fine, quiet. A little creepy the way empty houses always are, but nothing I wasn't used to. On the 5th night I was alone. I was doing my exterior walk around midnight. It was a clear night actually, so pretty decent visibility for once. And as I came around the east side of the property, I noticed the gate to the back field was open. Now this was a simple farm gate, just a metal swing gate on a chain latch, and it was always latched when I checked it. I stood there for a second and told myself maybe the wind had pushed it open. Latches like that can be finicky, and I just went ahead and closed it, but I felt off after that. I went back inside and sat at the desk, and I just had this thing in the back of my head that I couldn't shake. You know that feeling where your brain noticed something but hasn't told you what it is yet? It was like that. I went back through the driveway camera footage from earlier in the evening, and I didn't see any vehicles come in, so I went back further and further, and then I stopped. At 9:47, about 12 minutes before I'd even arrived to start my shift, the driveway camera caught something. Headlights at the far end of the drive, just barely in frame. They sat there for maybe 30 seconds and then went dark. No car came up the driveway. The lights just went off. I sat with that for a long time. Then I called it into my coordinator and they told me to log it and keep an eye on things, which is the same useless advice I'd gotten on jobs before, so I wasn't surprised. I didn't sleep great that day. When I came back the next night, I was paying attention in a different way than I had been before, checking things more carefully, logging times. And it was during my midnight walk that night that I found the window. On the back of the house, there's an old mudroom that was part of the original structure. Small room, old wooden window frame, the kind with the latch that flips over. The latch was open. Window was closed but unlocked. And the thing is, I had checked that window 3 nights ago. I remembered it specifically because the paint on the frame was chipped and I'd made a note of it in my log. It had been latched. I stood there for a while, just thinking, and then I heard something inside the house. Now look, old houses make sounds, especially old houses that have been renovated because you've got like 4 different generations of plumbing and electrical and settling, and it all just groans and creaks at different rates. I knew this house made sounds. I'd been there 2 months, but this was different. This was a sound that came and stopped, and then came again in a rhythm that wasn't random. It was coming from upstairs. I want to be really clear here that I stood outside that back door for a solid 3 or 4 minutes before I went in. I was not being brave. I was genuinely trying to talk myself out of it, but I also needed to know. So I went in and I stood in the kitchen and I listened. I waited 2 minutes. Then from upstairs, that sound again, a slow, repetitive creak, like weight shifting back and forth. I grabbed the flashlight off the desk and went to the bottom of the stairs and just stood there, listening. And after maybe 30 seconds, it stopped. And then the house was completely silent in that way that feels different from normal quiet, like the air in the room had changed. I went up the stairs slowly, and I checked the first hallway, and it was empty. I checked the 2 rooms on that side, both empty. Then I went to the second hallway, and the door at the end was open. And I knew that door was supposed to be closed because the family kept it shut. Something about a renovation that was half finished and they didn't want the kids in there. I stood in the doorway and pointed my flashlight in. It was a big, empty room, subfloor exposed, framing on one wall partially done, some construction materials in the corner. And the window on the far side was open, not unlocked. Open, screen pushed out. The wind from outside was moving the plastic sheeting that was taped over part of the framing, back and forth, slowly. That was the sound. I went to the window and looked out. There was a porch roof below it, and beyond that, the backyard and the tree line. And I stood there looking out into the dark, trying to figure out if someone had come in through that window, or if maybe the plastic sheeting had just been moving this whole time, and I'd never noticed because I'd never been in this room. And while I was standing there, I heard the back door open downstairs. Not the front, the back. The door I'd come in through, which I had definitely closed behind me. And then I heard footsteps in the kitchen below me. I don't really know how to describe what I did in the next few seconds because I'm not sure I made a conscious decision. I think I just moved. I got away from the window. I got out of that room. I got to the top of the stairs and I stopped there, and I listened, and the footsteps had stopped too. I called 911 from the top of those stairs. I kept my voice as low as I could, and I told them I had a possible intruder and gave the address, and they told me to stay on the line, and I did. I stayed right there at the top of the stairs for the 11 minutes it took for a patrol car to come up the driveway. When the officers cleared the house, they didn't find anyone inside, but the back door was standing wide open, which I had not left it. And when we went outside and the officer shone his light along the back of the house, there were boot prints in the mud below that open upstairs window. Someone had come down from that porch roof. They'd been in the house while I was outside on my walk, and when I came back in and went upstairs, they just waited. And when I was up there looking out the window, they walked right out behind me. I don't know how long they'd been doing this. I don't know if it was connected to the guard before me leaving. I don't know what they were looking for, or if they found it. What I know is that for at least 11 minutes, I was standing at the top of a dark staircase in an empty house with someone on the other side of the door below me, and neither of us moved. And they had every advantage, and they chose to walk out. I've thought a lot about why they did that, and I still don't have a good answer, and that bothers me more than I know how to explain.